My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 30 years old. 3 years ago, my parents told me they had nothing left to give, not a single dollar, while my 4-year-old daughter was losing her fight against cancer. 6 weeks later, I found out they had wired $220,000 to fund my brother's restaurant. The wire transfer was dated 11 days before Emma's treatment window closed forever. They don't know I found the documents. They don't know I kept every bank statement, every email, every voicemail where my mother cried and said she was so sorry but there was simply nothing there. 47 pages. I have them in a manila folder in my closet to this day. Last spring, my brother collapsed in his own kitchen. Acute liver failure. The transplant coordinator called me on a Tuesday morning and told me I was the only compatible living donor they'd found. My mother called 2 hours later. She said, "Claire, you're his only chance. I want to tell you what I said next. But first, I need to take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the beginning." I grew up in Riverside, California, in a beige house on a quiet street where every lawn was the same shade of tired green. My dad worked in commercial insurance for 30 years. My mother managed a dental office until she retired. Comfortable, stable, the kind of household where nothing was ever said out loud that couldn't be unsaid. And everything important got buried under politeness. My brother Ryan is 5 years older than me. From the outside, we looked like a normal family. From the inside, if you knew where to look, you could see the line that divided us as clearly as a wall. Ryan's college fund when we were teenagers was $44,000. I know because I found the statements when I was helping my parents move boxes to a storage unit in 2014. Mine was $9,500. When I asked my mother about it, she smiled and said Ryan had more time to accumulate interest. I was 22 years old, and I almost believed her. Ryan graduated from UC San Diego in 2010 with no debt, a car my parents bought him, and a closet full of interview clothes they'd taken him to purchase at Nordstrom. I graduated from Cal State Long Beach in 2015 with $58,000 in student loans, a 10-year-old Honda with a cracked bumper, and the vague sense that I was always one bad month away from drowning. My parents called it circumstance. I called it a pattern. But I was still young enough to tell myself it didn't matter. I had Marcus. I had my work. I had enough. I met Marcus at a college friend's wedding in 2015. He was the kind of man who refilled your water glass without being asked and remembered what you said 3 conversations later. We got married in 2018 inches, a small ceremony at a park in Pasadena. My parents gave us a check for $1,500 as a wedding gift. I didn't think much of it at the time. 6 months later, Ryan got married in a vineyard in Napa. My parents paid for the rehearsal dinner $8,000. I found out from my aunt and gave them a down payment contribution of $30,000 toward their first home. I know because Ryan mentioned it at Thanksgiving that year. Not to brag, he said, just as a point of information. I sat across the table and smiled and said, "Congratulations." Marcus squeezed my hand under the tablecloth. He knew. Emma Rose Donovan was born on March 7, 2019. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She had Marcus's dark curly hair and my green eyes, and a laugh that could make strangers stop on the sidewalk and smile. My parents drove up from Riverside when she was 3 days old. My mother held her for 20 minutes and cried happy tears. My father took photos on his phone. It was the closest I ever felt to them as an adult. They visited 4 times in her first 2 years. Ryan and his wife came once. He brought a stuffed elephant from the airport gift shop. I told myself it was fine. We were busy people. Life moves fast. Emma was enough. Emma got sick in January 2023. She was 3 years and 10 months old. She started complaining about her stomach hurting, the kind of complaint that every parent hears and files under growing pains or bad dreams. But it didn't go away. Her pediatrician found an abdominal mass on the 4th visit. The words the oncologist used at Children's Hospital Los Angeles were precise and devastating in equal measure. Stage 3, neuroblastoma, a tumor the size of a lemon behind her left adrenal gland. Treatable, the doctor said carefully. Potentially curable, depending on the response to standard protocols. But Emma's particular subtype carried a genetic marker MYCN amplification that made standard treatment insufficient. What she needed was a consolidated immunotherapy protocol following initial chemotherapy. The drug was called dinutuximab. It was FDA approved. It worked, but our insurance classified the full consolidation cycle as partially experimental under our specific plan, and the out-of-pocket cost for the complete protocol was $168,000. Our deductible and maximum out-of-pocket would cover a portion. What remained was $141,000. The treatment window, the oncologist explained, was 8 weeks. After initial chemo, Emma's immune system would be at its most receptive. Miss the window and the cancer's chances of spreading increased dramatically. 8 weeks, $141,000. Marcus and I sat in the hospital parking garage for 40 minutes after that appointment. Neither of us cried right away. We just sat there in the car in the concrete dark, doing math out loud like if we could just find the right equation, the answer would change. Our savings were $18,000. Marcus had a 401k, with around $34,000 we could access with penalties. His parents were retired teachers in Ohio, with no real liquidity. We started a GoFundMe that same night. In 3 weeks, 2,200 people donated. Strangers, co-workers, the parents of kids in Emma's preschool class, people from our church, our neighbors. Every notification that came in made me cry. People who'd never met my daughter were giving $25, $50, $100 with notes that said, "Fight hard," and "We're praying for your girl." We raised $37,800. We were still $103,000 short. Marcus was the one who said it first. He said it quietly. On a Sunday night, after Emma had fallen asleep between us, watching a movie about a talking dog, he said, "We need to call your parents." I hadn't asked my parents for money since I was 23 and needed $400 to cover rent during a gap between jobs. They'd given it to me with a lecture about financial planning that lasted longer than it took me to pay them back. But this was Emma. I called my mother on a Wednesday morning in February, while Marcus was at work and Emma was at my neighbor's house playing with her kids, still feeling okay from the first round of chemo, still laughing at cartoons, still herself. The call lasted 19 minutes. My mother's voice was soft and full of sorrow and utterly immovable. She said she and my father had been living on fixed income since my father's early retirement in 2020. She said their retirement accounts had taken a serious hit during the market correction. She said they wished they could do more. She said she'd light a candle for Emma at church. I said thank you, and hung up and stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the refrigerator covered in Emma's drawings. My father called back 2 days later. He did most of the talking. He said they'd looked at every option. He said their money was locked in funds they couldn't touch without catastrophic penalties. He said I should look into hospital financial assistance programs. He said he was heartbroken. He sounded like a man reading from a script he'd practiced. I said, "Dad, we're talking about your granddaughter." He said, "I know. I'm sorry, Claire. We just don't have it." I asked him directly. I said, "How much do you have liquid right now?" There was a pause. He said that wasn't a conversation he was willing to have. I said, "I'm asking you to help save Emma's life." He said he was sorry and he loved me and there was nothing to be done. He hung up. I called Ryan an hour later. He said he and his wife were in the middle of opening a restaurant and every dollar they had was committed. He said the timing was terrible. He said he was really, really sorry. He said to keep him updated. He said he'd pray for her. Marcus tried next. He called my father directly without telling me. My father told him they were doing everything they could and that Marcus needed to look into more creative financing options. Marcus told me about that call 2 months after Emma died. I cried for an hour when he told me. Not for me. For Marcus, who'd had to stand in the parking lot of his office building and beg my father for our daughter's life, while I didn't even know it was happening. The deadline passed on April 3rd. Emma's 4th birthday. I remember that I made her a chocolate cake with pink frosting and 4 candles shaped like stars, and I sang to her and she blew them out and laughed and said she wanted the corner piece because it had the most frosting. I fed her the cake. I sat on the floor of our living room and watched her play with a birthday gift from our neighbor, a plastic kitchen set she called her cooking shop, and I held every single second in my chest like something fragile I was, terrified to put down. The oncologist called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. I already knew what she was going to say. Emma's cancer progressed faster than they'd hoped. By July, she was in and out of the hospital. By September, she was there permanently. Marcus and I took shifts, sleeping in the chair next to her bed. She was brave in a way that still makes me unable to breathe when I think about it directly. She used to say, "I'm okay, Mommy," when I cried. She was 4 years old, and she was comforting me. On October 14th, 2023, at 4:22 inches the morning, Emma died. Marcus was holding her left hand. I was holding her right. The room was quiet except for the machines, and then it wasn't. I held her hand for a long time after. It was still warm. I kept thinking that if I just held on long enough, something would reverse. Nothing reversed. I didn't call my parents. My mother found out from my aunt. They flew in for the funeral. 50 people were there. Maybe 60. My parents sat 2 rows behind us. They didn't sit with us. My mother was in a gray coat I recognized from years ago. My father wore his good suit. After the service, my mother touched my arm and said she was so profoundly sorry and if there was anything they could do. I looked at her hand on my arm. I said, "You could have done something. You chose not to." She started to say something. I walked away. My father sent a card. Inside was a check for $300. I held it for about 30 seconds. Then I deposited it and donated every dollar to the Children's Hospital Foundation in Emma's name. I didn't speak to my parents or my brother for a long time after that. I thought that was the end of it. I thought the story was over. 5 months after Emma died, I couldn't sleep. This wasn't unusual. I hadn't slept a full night in, longer than I could count. Marcus would fall asleep around midnight, exhausted from work and grief and the daily effort of holding both of us together. And I would lie there in the dark, with my thoughts looping in the same worn grooves. On February 19th, 2024, at 2:40 inches the morning, I was scrolling on my phone with no purpose, just that mindless late-night scroll that's really just your brain trying to outrun itself when I saw my mother's Instagram post. It was a photo of Ryan's restaurant. The caption said, "So proud of our son. Dream becomes reality. Grand opening night at Coastal Kitchen, San Diego." There were string lights. There were people in nice clothes holding wine glasses. There was my brother in a white chef's coat, grinning at the camera. There was my mother, beaming like she'd built the place herself. 42 likes, comments saying, "Gorgeous and amazing and so happy for you." I stared at the screen. I put my phone face down on the bed. I lay in the dark. I didn't sleep. For the next 3 weeks, I couldn't let it go. Marcus noticed. He asked. I told him it was nothing. Then, one night, he found me at the kitchen table, with my laptop open and my coffee untouched and cold. He sat down across from me without saying anything. I turned the screen toward him. I'd pulled up the San Diego County Assessor's records for the building Ryan leased. I'd found the business registration for Coastal Kitchen LLC. I'd found the California Secretary of State filing. And then I'd done something I'd never done before. I found Ryan's corporate bank records, not the private ones, the public business filing that included initial capitalization disclosures. The startup investment, $220,000 from 2 contributing investors listed as Charles Donovan and Patricia Donovan. My parents, $220,000. Marcus looked up from the screen. His jaw was tight. "Keep going," he said quietly. I'd already found more. I'd found my father's TD Ameritrade account on a paper statement that had accidentally been mailed to our house 2 years earlier when they'd briefly used our address. I'd kept it. I don't know why I'd kept it. I went back through our files at 2 in the morning and found it in the back of a folder. Account balance, as of October 2022, $740,000. My mother had a separate Fidelity account I'd seen referenced in a family email thread from 2021. I searched public records long enough to find it referenced in a county tax document. Estimated portfolio value at the time of Ryan's restaurant funding, over $400,000, over $1 million between them. Not liquid, my father had said. Not liquid enough to save Emma, but liquid enough to fund a restaurant. Marcus found the wire transfer confirmation. It was in an email on the old iPad we'd used to share family photos, still logged into my mother's account, never cleared. The email was from my father to Ryan, dated March 22nd, 2023. Subject line: Investment confirmed. I read it out loud. My father had written, "Ryan, the wire has been sent. $220,000 as agreed. We believe in this project, and we believe in you. This is what we worked for, building something lasting for our family. The restaurant is a tangible legacy. It will appreciate in value. We know the timing isn't ideal with everything going on with Claire, but your opportunity can't wait. Coastal real estate doesn't stay available. We've thought about it carefully. This is the right investment for this family's future." March 22nd, 2023. The wire went out March 22nd. Emma's treatment window closed April 3rd. 11 days. They had 11 days when they could have changed their minds. They wired $220,000 to my brother's restaurant, and 11 days later my daughter ran out of time. I printed everything. I put it in a manila folder. I didn't cry. I had been through the stage of crying. What came next was something colder and more precise. I looked at Marcus. I said, "I want to have dinner with them." He understood what that meant. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. "When?" I called my mother on a Sunday. She answered before the second ring finished, like she'd been waiting. Her voice cracked immediately. "Claire. Honey." I told her I'd been thinking. I told her I wanted to try to start repairing things. I said family mattered, even after loss. I said I needed to begin somewhere. She cried on the phone. She said yes, absolutely. Come down to Riverside. She'd make a real dinner. She'd call Ryan. She'd have everyone there. I said that was exactly what I wanted. We made it for the following Saturday. Marcus asked me twice on the drive down whether I was sure. I had the folder on my lap the whole way. I told him I'd never been more certain of anything. My mother had made pot roast. The house smelled like it always had on Saturday nights when I was growing up, like something warm and ordinary and safe, a smell that no longer matched what I knew about the people who lived inside it. Ryan and his wife were already there when we arrived. He hugged me. He said it was really good to see me. He had color in his face, a tan from the San Diego sun, the easy confidence of a man whose dreams had recently been funded. We sat down. My mother poured wine. For the first 15 minutes we talked about nothing. Ryan's wife asked about my job. Marcus described a project at work. My mother refilled glasses. My father asked how the drive down was. I said fine. Then my mother said, "Ryan, tell Claire about the restaurant's opening month numbers. It's been doing so well." Ryan smiled. Better than projected. "Weekend reservations are booked out 6 weeks. My father raised his glass. "That's my boy." My mother turned to me with that slightly apologetic softness she always deployed when the conversation had already left me behind. "Claire, are you thinking about going back to work full-time? Or still taking it slow?" I said. "I went back in January." She said, "Good. Keeping busy is important. It helps." The table was quiet for a moment. I reached down to my bag. I set the folder on the table. Everyone stopped. Ryan looked at it. My father's expression shifted into something careful. I opened the folder to the first page. I said, "This is Emma's death certificate. October 14th, 2023. Cause of death: complications from stage 3 neuroblastoma, MYCN amplified subtype." My mother made a sound. I turned to the next page. "This is the Coastal Kitchen LLC business registration. Initial capitalization, $220,000. I looked at Ryan. "I thought you said every dollar you had was committed when I asked you for help." He opened his mouth. I turned another page before he could say anything. "This is the wire confirmation email. Dad to Ryan. March 22nd, 2023. 11 days before Emma's treatment window closed." I slid it across the table. My father looked at it like it was something he didn't recognize. My mother had her hand over her mouth. "And this," I said, turning to the next page, "is your TD Ameritrade statement, Dad. October 2022. $740,000. I let that sit for a moment. You told me you had no liquidity. My father pushed back from the table slightly. He said, Claire, these accounts aren't as accessible as you're making them sound. You wired $220,000 to fund a restaurant. That was a structured investment decision over time, 11 days, I said. I kept my voice level. You had 11 days where you could have made a different decision, while Emma was still in her treatment window. While there was still time, Ryan spoke then, and his voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it that I recognized as the tone he'd used since we were children to explain why the rules that applied to me didn't apply to him. He said, Val Claire. Mom and Dad made a financial judgment call. The restaurant has a clear return path. Emma's treatment odds weren't guaranteed. Even with immunotherapy, neuroblastoma recurrence rates for her subtype are. I looked at him. Say that again? He hesitated. I'm just saying. From a pure risk-return perspective. From a risk-return perspective. I'm not trying to be callous. Statistically, she was 4 years old. My voice rose for the first time since I'd sat down. Your niece was 4 years old. My father stood up. His face was flushed, and I could see he'd moved from defensive to something uglier. He said, You want the truth? You've always needed everything spelled out, so fine. Here it is. The restaurant is a real asset. It employs 12 people. It will be here in 20 years. The treatment you were asking for had a 40% failure rate even in the best studies. We had to think about the whole family's future, not just one outcome. I stared at him. One outcome, I repeated. My mother said, Charles, I'm telling her the truth. My father said. She asked for it. He looked at me with something that I think he believed was strength. We would have spent $141,000, and she might have died anyway. At least the restaurant, he stopped. But it was already out, I said, slowly. At least the restaurant what? He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. My mother was crying. Ryan had gone gray. His wife was staring at her plate. Marcus was standing. I stood up. I picked up the folder. I said, You calculated the return on your granddaughter's life and decided it wasn't worth it. You turned her into a line item and she didn't make the cut. My father started to say something about context and long-term planning. I said, I will not be coming back here. You will not call me. If you send letters, I will return them. If you show up at my house, I will call the police. I want you to understand that I mean every word of that. I looked at my brother. I said, Enjoy the restaurant. Every table you turn, every reservation you fill, that's Emma. You built it on her. I walked out. Marcus was behind me. The door closed. We drove 3 hours back to Los Angeles without stopping. Marcus kept his hand on mine most of the way. I didn't cry until we were in our driveway, and then I cried for a long time. The ugly kind. The kind that doesn't feel like release. Just like losing something all over again. The silence that followed lasted just over a year. My mother called 31 times in the first week. I blocked her number. My father emailed. I set up a filter that auto-deleted anything from his address. Ryan texted once. A long message I saw previewed before I deleted it. Something about how he hadn't known the full picture and he wanted to talk when I was ready. I wasn't ready. I changed my phone number in March. I didn't tell them. I went back to therapy. My therapist's name is Dr. Angela Torres. She has a cactus on her windowsill and she never tells me what to feel. In our second session back, she asked me what I was carrying that wasn't mine to carry. I said I didn't understand the question. She said, You spent a year trying to save Emma. You're spending the aftermath trying to punish yourself for failing. But Claire, they failed her. Not you. I cried for the rest of that hour. I went back every week. The call came on a Tuesday morning in April 2025. I was at my desk at work, going through case files, when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go. Something made me answer. The woman identified herself as a transplant coordinator at Scripps Mercy Hospital in San Diego. She told me my brother had been admitted 4 days earlier with acute liver failure secondary to hepatic vein thrombosis. She said his medical team had tested every available family member for living donor compatibility. She said my parents were not suitable candidates due to age and a clotting risk factor in my mother. She said they'd screened the national registry. She said I was the closest potential match they'd found. And would I be willing to come in for a full compatibility workup? I asked what would happen if I said no. She said Ryan's place on the cadaveric transplant list was active, but his condition was deteriorating at a rate that made it very unlikely he would survive the wait. She said without a living donor transplant within the next few weeks, his prognosis was extremely poor. I said I needed time to think. She said of course. But she wanted me to understand that time was the one thing in short supply. My mother called 2 hours later. Different number. I picked up before I knew I was going to. She was crying before she said my name. She said she knew she had no right to call. She said she knew I owed them nothing. She said she was begging me, not as my mother, just as a person standing in a hospital hallway watching her son die, begging me to at least get tested. I listened to her cry for 30 seconds. I said, "Don't call this number again." I hung up. I sat at my desk for the rest of the afternoon and didn't do any work. Marcus came home and found me in the kitchen standing at the counter like I'd forgotten what I was doing. He looked at my face. He said, "Who called?" I told him. He sat down. He didn't tell me what to do. He said, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I said, "I don't know what I'm deciding." He said, "That's okay. You don't have to know tonight." I called Dr. Torres the next morning. Emergency session. We sat in her office with the afternoon light coming through the window, and I talked for 45 minutes without stopping. When I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What's the argument against going?" I said, "If I save him, they get everything they wanted. Again, they funded his dream. They let Emma die. And now they get to keep him anyway," she said. "And if you don't?" I thought about it for a long time. I said, "I become someone I don't recognize." She leaned forward slightly. She said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it before you answer. If Emma were here right now, and she knew everything, the folder, the wire transfer, the dinner, all of it, what would she say to you?" I closed my eyes. I could see her so clearly. 4 years old, green eyes, dark curls, standing in the kitchen in her pajamas telling me she was okay. I said, "She would tell me not to be like them." Dr. Torres said, "Yes." And? I sat with it. Emma, who comforted me while she was dying. Emma, who named her stuffed elephant after the neighbor's dog because she wanted everyone to feel included. Emma, who blew out her birthday candles and said she wished for everyone to be happy, not just her. She would tell me to go. She would tell me to do it not for Ryan, not for my parents, but because she raised me better than my parents did. I called the transplant coordinator on a Thursday morning. I told her I would come in for the workup. I told her I had conditions. I did not want to see my parents in the hospital. I did not want contact with Ryan, beyond what the medical team required. I wanted a patient advocate present for every conversation. She said she would arrange everything. The full compatibility evaluation was on a Friday. They confirmed the match by Tuesday. I was a viable donor, segment 2 to 3 left lateral lobe. The coordinator called it a highly favorable anatomical match. She told me the risk to me was real but low. She told me my brother's survival probability with the transplant was significantly better than without. I said I had one more condition. I said I was doing this because I chose to, not because I was asked to. And when it was done, I was done. No contact, no follow-up from my family. She said she understood. Marcus held my hand the whole drive to San Diego. We didn't talk much. He had a playlist on low, just something quiet in the background. I looked out the window at the coast. I was pre-op when Ryan appeared. I don't know how he got through. A nurse came to tell me there was a man at the unit door asking to speak with me. I said I didn't want visitors. She said he was asking for just 1 minute. I said fine. 1 minute. He came in wearing a hospital gown over street clothes, IV line taped to his arm. He looked like he'd aged a decade. He stood in the doorway, and for a moment he didn't say anything. Then he said, "I know you're not doing this for me." I said, "I'm not." He said, "I need to say something anyway. I knew more than I told you. About Mom and Dad's money. About the timing of the restaurant. I knew enough. I let myself not ask questions because I didn't want the answers. That's not the same as not knowing. And I'm sorry. I am genuinely, Completely sorry. For Emma. For all of it. I looked at him for a long time. I said, "Okay." He waited like there might be more. There wasn't. I said, "Go back to your room. You have surgery tomorrow morning." He nodded. At the door, he stopped. He said, "I know it doesn't matter, but she was a wonderful kid." I said, "It matters." He left. I sat back against the pillow and breathed until the anesthesiologist came in. The surgery was 6.5 hours. I woke up in recovery with Marcus next to me and a pain in my abdomen like I'd been folded in half. The nurse told me I'd done beautifully. She told me Ryan was in surgery and the graft was viable. She said I was very brave. I told her I wasn't brave. I told her I just didn't want to be the kind of person who let something preventable happen when they could stop it. She said that sounded like bravery to her. I said maybe. I asked for more pain medication and went back to sleep. 5 weeks later, the transplant coordinator called to tell me the engraftment was successful. She said Ryan was recovering well. She said his liver function was approaching normal range. She said he'd asked if she could pass along his gratitude. I said that was fine. She said, "What you did was extraordinary, Claire." I said, "My daughter would have done it. I just did what she would have done." I hung up. I sat on my couch and looked at the photo of Emma on the bookshelf, her 2nd birthday. Chocolate cake on her face. Laughing, and I told her. I said, "I did it, baby. I did it the way you would have." I think I heard her laugh. I know that sounds like something people say. I heard it anyway. 8 months later, a letter came through my attorney, who I'd asked to serve as an intermediary in case of any family contact. Inside were 2 pages in my mother's handwriting. She wrote that she knew she had no right to ask for anything. She wrote that she and my father had been in individual and couples therapy for the past year. She wrote that my father had been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's the previous spring, and that the diagnosis had done something to him, had cracked something open that decades of rational distance had kept sealed. She wrote that they had dissolved their stake in Ryan's restaurant and taken the proceeds, $195,000, and established a fund at Children's Hospital Los Angeles in Emma's name, specifically designated for families who couldn't afford immunotherapy costs for neuroblastoma patients. She attached the foundation documentation. I sat with that for a very long time. I called Dr. Torres. I said, "They donated the restaurant money to CHOP in Emma's name." She said, "How does that land?" I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "That's the right answer." I asked her if I should respond. She said, "What do you want?" I said I didn't know that either. She said, "Then you don't have to decide today." I waited 4 months before I responded. I sent a single sentence through my attorney. I wrote, "I received your letter. I'm not ready to talk, but I wanted you to know I received it." That was all. My mother wrote back 1 line. "Thank you for telling us. We'll be here." I put that letter in the folder too, behind the wire transfer, behind the death certificate, behind 47 pages of the worst year of my life. I haven't opened the folder since. I don't think I need to anymore. Not because I've forgiven them. Forgiveness isn't a decision you make once. It's something you practice in small moments when the anger rises, and you choose, deliberately, to put it back down rather than carry it another step. Some days I can do that. Some days I can't. Some days I'm in the grocery store and I see a little girl with dark curly hair and I have to stand in the cereal aisle for a moment with my hand on the cart until I can breathe again. Some days I water the cherry blossom tree we planted in our backyard for Emma, and I feel something close to peace. I don't call my parents. I don't know if I ever will, but the letter is in a drawer, not in the trash. Ryan texts once a month, short texts, a photo of the sunrise from his apartment window, a note that says, "Thinking of you." I read them, and I don't always respond, but sometimes I type back a single word, "Thanks." It doesn't mean everything is okay. It means I'm still deciding what okay looks like from here. Marcus and I have started talking about the future in a way we stopped doing for a long time. We planted vegetables this spring. We have a dog now, a rescue mutt named Biscuit who Emma would have loved with her entire heart and who somehow already seems to know where her photograph is and likes to sleep below it. Small things, real things. The Emma Rose Donovan Fund at Children's Hospital Los Angeles has helped 3 families since it was established. 3 children who needed treatment their families couldn't afford. 3 kids who got a window that stayed open. I think about them on the hard days. I think about Emma, who would have celebrated her 6th birthday in March, who would have probably already decided she wanted to be a veterinarian, or a chef, or a marine biologist, depending on the week, who told me once before she got sick that her favorite thing in the whole world was when all the people she loved were in the same room together. I didn't save my brother for my parents. I didn't save him to earn anything or prove anything to anyone who'd already shown me what they were. I saved him because my daughter taught me in 4 years and 7 months of living, in the way she held my hand and told me she was okay while she was dying, that love isn't a transaction. It's not an asset you protect until it appreciates. It's not an investment you make when the return looks good. It's a choice. And every day it's a choice again. They chose wrong. I chose different. And on the days when that feels like enough, I stand in the backyard in the morning light, and I tell Emma about it. I tell her the fund is doing good work. I tell her Biscuit is ridiculous and she would adore him. I tell her Marcus made French toast for dinner last night just because he wanted to. I tell her I'm figuring it out. I don't know what comes next. I'm not sure I need to, but I know who I am when it matters. Emma made sure of that. If this story reached you somewhere real, somewhere you felt it before, please leave a comment and tell me what you would have done. Would you have walked through those hospital doors? I read every single response. And if you know someone who's carrying something like this, someone trying to choose who to be after they've been broken by the people who were supposed to protect them, share this with them. Sometimes just knowing someone else has stood at that same doorway makes it possible to take the next step.